I have come to the muddiest place in town, definitely today, although it's a tad warmer than when I made my walk for the extra mile this week. Let me just get a quick sketchbook image because I've got some beautiful sun showing along the path. I'm having a shoot into the sun day.
The Photowalk is brought to you by mpb.com. Quality used photo and video kit. Buy, sell, trade, create at mpb.com.
It's still a little crunchy underfoot. It's not quite completely thawed. Stand by. I am about to salivate about a camera. There's a lot said about the Ricoh GR3 as the ultimate carry-everywhere camera. How many guests over the last year? I mean, I know Sean Tucker's mentioned it, but we've had various other guests mention this camera in passing. We've had some letters about it. I mean, it's a small camera. It does pack away in a pocket because it doesn't have a standby for a tech quote. It doesn't have a large, sticky, outy, lensy thing. And because this year, mpb.com are going to let me do a few test drives, I thought I might try one out. It arrived, yes, one has arrived just prior to heading out for today's photo walk. So I didn't have a chance to check the battery and all that kind of stuff before I headed out with you for this photo walk today. But I shall be using it over the next couple of weeks. Now, you know me, I love my X100V and my X Pro 1, which I've got with me today. But I've been thinking about this camera for a while. And so the opportunity, thanks to MPB, to do a few test drives this year, perfect. Gives me a chance to really put one through its paces. And I'll be going into town this week to London, and I shall use it there. So I will. Right, episode 365, which seems as good an episode as any. And the title supports this, of course, to celebrate the 365. One picture every day for a year, usually posted somewhere like an Instagram account. Although you could also try Vero now. A Flickr gallery. Flickr's very popular, as you'll hear in the show today. Or, wait for it, going to be a bit old-fashioned now, a blog. A blog, Neil? Yes, a blog. Oh, you'll be talking about 8-track tapes next, Grandad. Well, maybe, but however you post it, or wherever you share them, it's, I think, a great mechanism to keep you current, keep you photographing, keep you seeing. So yes, however you share it as a project, the great thing about a 365 is keeping your curiosity muscle toned. So toned, so practiced, it could dress in Lycra and start its own viral TikTok channel. But when it comes to curiosity, I think I have the perfect guest for you today, who works, well, exceptionally well in this sub-theme, if you like a bit, for the show today. You know, I was looking back through some of the monologues that I've written over the past couple of years in particular. Many of them have been used on the Patreon channel as either the extra mile or more, as it used to be. And there are a good few thoughts about curiosity. Making and taking pictures is, as I often say and I talk about with guests, it's about being a collector in many ways. They, you, I, are collectors of life, collectors of moments, collectors of emotion, collectors of, let's call it curio. I do have a personal regret at this point, and I know you shouldn't have them, despite what Frank said in that famous song. But my regret is that I didn't start collecting much earlier on in my life. I mean, I had camera, I went amazing places, met fascinating people, saw breathtaking sights, but I didn't collect the pictures. And for that, I do retrospectively give myself a good sharp tap on the ankles. Because this thing you and I do, making our pictures along the paths and the roads and the places we visit, is an incredible gift when it comes to having our eyes open to this captivating, sometimes cruel, always surprising, inexplicable, but never disappointing visually, that is, world. I may have that the way wrong round for some folk, I know, but my guest today, I think, is aligned to that sentiment. Alice Tomlinson, winner of the 2018 Sony World Photography Award for the incredible Ex-Voto project, that's VOTO, which we'll talk about, a Taylor Wessing winner. I could now list, well, there's 31 others I could list. But the conversation today is simply about this, really. It all boils down to curiosity. That word, in terms of the very detailed way Alice researches and learns about the cultures and the people, the individuals, the stories that she photographs, which all comes back to this genuine wonder that Alice has for those who've piqued her inquiring mind.
Today on the Photowalk.
Some would potentially say I'm a nosy person. I don't know if I'm that nosy.
No, I like inquisitive.
I think inquisitive and curious, definitely. I'm very, very curious. I've always spent time, even when I was younger, I remember just being kind of fascinated. I'd be sitting in a cafe having an ice cream or whatever, and I was just watching the world go by, watching people interacting, watching humanity unfold in front of me, if you like. And I've always been very much an observer. I've always wanted to learn, and I've always been very, very curious about what makes us who we are, really.
Stories of life told by photographers. And today we're joined as you and I walk by Alice Tomlinson on this unique and special kind of photography show. Unique because you write it with your letters, your thoughts, your pictures that you share. And special because we get to spend time together making our photos, while those letters and guests, both past and present, inspire with thoughts about photography and life. It's a show about how making pictures has you feel, what it does for us and others around us. And I like to think it's also a show about kindness in many ways. In the mailbag today, I asked and you responded brilliantly with your advice and experience of making your own 365s. Also today, I'm not sure whether I can call it new news because I've mentioned it in passing before, but something about an adventure to come in 2024. We ask, why shoot in black and white? And I suppose back on the 365 thing for a moment, a letter about not being hard on yourself when stuff doesn't quite work the way you want or think it should. So it's a show today about curiosity, yes, and it's a show about what some photographers call the ultimate challenge, documenting life every day for a year. The best part of nearly 7 billion people on this planet are able to make a photograph with something and record life. So we're not walking alone, documenting our place and our time in this world. Coffee, Garibaldi's, walking boots on, so let's walk. I am, of course, aware that you may not want to embark on a 365, so you may be thinking, or even saying out loud, if you're like me, hang about, Neil, this isn't for me, this one, but I'm going to suggest it most certainly is, because much of the advice is about getting out with a camera today, back to curiosity, and who knows, you may even listen and think, this 365 thing, maybe there's something in it. Maybe a slightly different version for me, but maybe there's something in it. I can see my other listener giving me that, all right, Neil, let's see, what have you got for me? Look, so I'm going to start with a letter from Canada land, where where actually at the moment my mother and father-in-law are skiing. Though I don't think they're in Toronto, like my new writer here, Jeff Stewart, who belongs to a photo walking group, which I noted within the letter, which may be a fantastic way, actually, to share this show. Like-minded folk who have formed groups to walk in. Hang on, the sun's coming out again. I may have to, every so often, just dart out from a letter. And because I've set myself this challenge of photographing into the sun today, I don't know why, it's an arbitrary one, and it's just disappeared behind the clouds. So far, I've only managed 2. I may not have many sketches today because the clouds have suddenly turned up to the party. Anyway, Jeff. Yes, Jeff. Now, I've shortened the full letters for the sake of our walk, because some of them are very detailed, which I thank you most sincerely for. But you can read the full letters, all of them on today's show page at the foot of the page. And there are some letters that I haven't had necessarily time to read today, but they will be on there as well. So if you've written in about the 365, then your letter will be on the show page today. So Jeff, well, I'm into my second year of 365ing, he says, and my third week of photographing the latest one, having started Jan 1st of the year. It was after about 2 or 3 days into 2022 that I decided to continue shooting in the first place and gave myself guidelines for how I wanted to challenge myself, as if taking photographs every day wasn't enough. I joined the Project 365 Flickr group and have been posting with them from the start. I told you Flickr was one of those places that people are using for this. I was going to shoot with my Samsung Galaxy smartphone, which I would have with me wherever I would be at any time of the day. My photographs were going to be square, and I would alternate between colour and black and white. Starting a 365 in the middle of a Canadian winter can be quite a challenge, but I have persevered. Of all the photographs taken in 22, only 4 were actually shot inside my home. Most were taken within walking distance in Toronto. Some were taken on long, solitary photo walks. Others were taken with other photo walkers, including the Toronto Photo Walks group. Some were taken on the coldest days of winter and the hottest days of summer. In the snow, the rain, the fog, the sun, and in the morning, throughout the day, and even into the evening. My advice, says Jeff, is very simple. Make it a habit. Make it a part of improving your mental and physical health. Enjoy the challenge. And I've linked to Jeff's 2 projects, the longer 22 one and the one he's just started in 23. Thanks for those very much. And then from Richard Yarp from Houston in Texas land. Hi, Neil. I completed a 365 in the middle of 2016, so we go back a few years for this one. Like you mentioned on the show, you can start any day you like. Yes, we did say that. And maybe if you feel encouraged by what you hear today, you can make the start of your 365 the date our 365 edition goes live, which is the 20th of January. 2023. I don't know, it's entirely up to you, but yeah, he's right. You do not have to start on January the 1st. It's a good line, I know, a line in the sand or whatever the phrase is, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that calendar date. I started mine in the middle of June in 2015, and I was able to complete it in June 2016, though in a way I've carried it on through, read on. It was at first a challenge to ensure I kept it up, but once I'd gone over 6 weeks, it did become routine. It was a challenge, though, coming up with ideas each day. As I was commuting into Houston daily, which is about 36 miles from our home in the Woodlands in Texas, I would try and make a stop either on my way to work or on my way back home, places where I felt compelled to take a picture. As for posting, I'd gotten the idea of the 365 from another podcaster, Jenny Stein, who hosted The Family Photographer. I have to say it's not one I'm familiar with, but I am now. It's currently an idle podcast, which is not a rude word, by the way. That's what they call podcasts that aren't current or ongoing. Although she's talked about bringing it back. I was an avid listener of her show, and she started a Flickr group for listeners to post their 365 photos. It ended up being an amazing community of photographers that all supported each other. That's what's great about this, isn't it? When photographers get together in groups and support each other. Since then, says Richard, I've been doing a continual 52-week project for the past 6.5 years, where I take and post at least a photo a week with that same group of photographer friends I made all those years ago. The benefits, he says, of doing a 365. Over the course of the year, I took over 15,000 photographs, although only posted 365. Because of that, my technical skills developed very quickly. My compositional skills also developed rather quickly. I became a ruthless editor of my work. As my work got better, so did the engagement I would see on Flickr. I've been fortunate to have been selected to be on Flickr's Daily Explore page approximately 100 times since early 2016. And I got into the habit of carrying a camera with me daily, a habit I've pretty much kept to this day. I think this is the key to being successful with this. And yes, it was okay to use cell phone photos, but as my goal was to improve my skills overall, I pretty much kept to my DSLR all the time, which is a Nikon D80. Richard's links to his extraordinary adventures with his camera I'll pop up on the show page today. He had some other reasons why it's a good idea to do a 365, and the full letter will be there as well. Right. Thank you, Richard, for your words, and I think we should have some inspiration. If indeed those two letters to start with words enough. I'm going to play you a few moments from a former guest, a name I think you'll be familiar with. I'm pretty sure. Jason Florio, 65 episodes ago, so episode number 300, the title of the show being Come On An African Adventure. There's a reason I want to play you a few moments from this show, actually, which I'll come to in a moment. But here's Jason sharing his curiosity and sharing his love for the most beautiful continent and the most fascinating country, the Gambia.
You know, I've been coming to Gambia on and off for about 20-something years, and one of the very first photographs I ever made was of it was when I had my I was working with an 8x10 Deerdorf camera and...
Not in the Grove, surely.
Well, on the bank at least, anyway. And I made a portrait of these oyster ladies that I used to buy oysters from. At that time I spent like 2 weeks living on the riverbank, but I never actually thought about going out and following them on the river at that point. I was doing these very clunky portraits with this old camera. And about 2 years ago, I got an assignment. It was actually for Brussels Airlines magazine to do a story on a group of the oyster ladies. And I was sort of kicking myself why I hadn't actually been out with them 18 plus years ago. But I spent a couple of days with them. I rented a small boat so I could follow them as they kind of go on their journey out through the mangroves. And I was really pleased with the pictures. I loved working with these ladies. They're just a really dynamic group. And that was it. That sort of parked that story. And then a few weeks ago, a friend of mine, a writer called J.R. Patterson, he wrote a piece on another group of oyster ladies, which was pitched to The Guardian. The Guardian came to me for pictures, so I presented some of the work I'd already done, and they said, actually, we'd like some additional pictures of this new group. So Helen and I went down to Lamin, which is an area which is sort of like a bit of a tourist area, but the ladies use it as their launch site. So we got down there about 7 o'clock in the morning, and then we sort of went off into the sort of semi-sunrise out onto the mangroves, and it's just idyllic out there. It's just so peaceful. Sound of the birds, and it's just the sound of the paddles, and then just the chipping of the oysters off the mangroves, and the ladies are singing and calling to each other. It probably hasn't changed in hundreds of years the way they're doing it.
Jason Florio, and there is a reason for playing you a few moments from his own adventure, and that is something about next year in we think it'll be January 2024. Hang on. This, Neil, sounds like an announcement. Well, it sort of is. It's more like testing the waters, he says, with a glint. Here we go. A glint of flashed eye. Did you miss it? Anyways, 2024, I, with Jason, and a filmmaker and a good friend of mine, actually, Andy Thompson, are hoping you may be interested to take your own African adventure with us. In the Gambia. It's a place, you know this, it's a place I love. I've not been there lots and lots and lots, but I've been there a few times now. And I can certainly see why Jason and his wife Helen love it. And my friend Andy and his adventures in the country since he's lived there with his wife Mampol and your beautiful children, because I know you're listening at the moment, Andy. Well, I hope you are. It's a fantastic country. It's a place, in fact, I tell you what, I'll put up a note to self now, going off-piste, off-script. I'll put up a short film that I made it's a few years back because, of course, we've had that horrible thing that starts with C in the middle of all that. Don't mention the virus, Neil. I'll try not to. Yeah, there was a film I made when I was going there to make a particular set of interviews. It's a sort of African adventure. So I'll pop that up on the show page. And while I remember, because this has come to mind, the film title I think involved the word rat. Don't worry, it was a clickbaity idea. You'll understand if you see the film, but it's a beautiful country, and it's. This is my way really of reaching out to you to see who may want to take one of, I think might be 6 to 10 places, possibly 8, he says, going for the middle ground. Costs, yes, to come, but for now I need to really sense who might want to fly to take an expedition up the Gambian River, photograph a fabulous country with the most welcoming people. There's a reason why it's called the Smiling Coast of Africa. And if you can, I suppose the best way to do that is either by writing to me, stories@photowalk.show, or indeed leave a comment on the show page today. But that's it. That was my, one of 2 announcements. The other not quite so exciting, I'll admit. But that's it. An African odyssey, an African adventure. You, I, the podcast, and some new friends in the Gambia. Right, a good link, and not tenuous in the least, to my guest today, Alice Tomlinson. Alice is an editorial and fine arts documentary photographer based in London, and that's all I shall tell you about for the moment, because we do unpick her journey. I stumbled there a bit because I remembered a part of the interview. Sorry, Alice, I've used the J word. I've peaked early with it. But yes, it's a conversation about curiosity and having a wonderfully curious mind. 2-parter, as always, split by some more of your letters and thoughts. And in part 1, we, you, I, and my other listener, get to learn about Alice's inspirations, which have led her to make her own wondrous adventures. Time out travel guides, Alice. It's one of the main reasons you do what you do, I suppose, as a photographer now. I mean, this wanderlust of finding a story, this intrigue, this rich tapestry of folk that you seek, who I personally haven't had the pleasure to meet, but I can do it through your pictures. It does sort of start with Time Out travel guides, doesn't it? Yeah,
they were my first real commissions in the photography world. So I was actually getting paid, not very much, but I was getting paid to travel and explore the world, really, from my early 20s into my 30s. And it was a wonderful opportunity to get to know communities, to understand cultures, it forced me to be very independent, to be very kind of adventuresome, to be very resourceful. And I was often sent on my own to cities, mostly in Europe and North America, for between kind of 3 and 4 weeks. So it was my first entry into the world of commercial photography, I guess. But out of that then came personal projects as well. So it was really something that acted as a kind of framework for my later photography projects. And I think it was really good kind of training almost for me. It was really good for me to do the groundwork, to think on my feet, to make the best of difficult situations, which has also very much helped with the projects I work on now.
So what year would this have been when you started?
Oh, a long time ago. Probably early 2000s.
I feel I shouldn't ask a question like that. It feels like...
No, it's fine. It was shortly after graduating from my English literature degree. So I didn't study photography originally, and it was my first proper commissioned work. So I really spent most of my 20s and early 30s working on these travel guides, which gave me incredible access to cities and people that I would never have normally really come across.
So does that mean you sort of fell into photography because it wasn't something that you studied as such? It was poetry, it's literature, and of course that plays a very important part in how you research and work now, I know, but at that time it doesn't sound like it was necessarily something you thought, I must be a photographer and travel the world.
No, I wasn't clear at that stage. I think I was like a lot of people. I'd done a humanities degree, so I was kind of discovering what it was I truly wanted to do. But I did spend a lot of time when I was at university working for the student paper as a photographer, which actually gave great access. I remember photographing people like Irvine Welsh, playwrights, writers, musicians, who were very open to being photographed by students, actually. I think they're much less threatening than the tabloid press. They're more willing to give you their time. Yeah. And they also remember being student and having, fond memories of that time. So I did that. And I also did a City and Guilds course at the local college. So I was often seen kind of around campus and around Leeds, where I was at university, with a kind of 35mm Pentax like hanging around my neck. And I got really into the darkroom work. I got very much into black and white photography and processing and printing my own work. But it wasn't until I'd actually been working commercially for a couple of years as a photographer, kind of successfully in some way and not successfully in other ways, like trying to scrape a living and doing other things like bar work and, office work, whatever I could to try and get by. And then I studied photography at Central St Martin's. So that was the first time I studied photography formally. It wasn't my BA. I did a postgraduate certificate at Art College in London.
For those that aren't aware of St Martin's, my brother-in-law actually studied there. It's not a bad place to go, is it? You meet some fairly creative types there.
Yes. So at that point, Central St Martin's is part of the University of Arts London, which is made up of several colleges, including LCC and Camberwell and Chelsea, and there's several of them, London College of Fashion. And Central St Martin's at that point was actually very much in the kind of hub of creative London, because it was right in Soho, it was on Charing Cross Road.
Yes.
Next to the Foyles bookshop.
Oh, I thought is it not there now then?
No, so now they've got a kind of swanky new campus in Granary Square near King's Cross, which is very slick and architect designed. But when I was there at Charing Cross Road, it was an absolute kind of melting pot of creativity. It was very typical art school. It was, paint splattered walls and grubby old sinks, but it was this kind of long, thin building on Charing Cross Road, and there wasn't security at that point. So you could kind of wander into fashion or you'd wander into sculpture. And so it felt like there was much more opportunities for collaboration. It felt very much like a real art school experience, as opposed to, sometimes I think going to art college now, you feel like a university is running as more of a business. But when I went, I was lucky enough to really be part of that movement of kind of true British art schools.
What are you saying, Alice? That we need to throw paint at the walls? I always remember my art department as being. You looked at the ceiling and you saw most of the work actually at some stage had been thrown up toward it.
Well, I think the problem now with universities, without necessarily becoming too political, is they're corporate and they're run as businesses, and you've lost a lot of the freedom that you once have. And now to go around St Martin's and Granary Square, you have to have security cards to enter different departments. When I was there was just this great sense of openness and freedom. And I think it was a wonderful time. I was lucky I even got a grant to study, and it was a really wonderful time to be a student. And it just felt that there were all these possibilities out there.
One thing I see immediately by and in and through your work, all of it is inquisitiveness. Have you always had a very inquisitive nature?
Yes. No, that's really important to my work. It's interesting you pick up on that. Some would potentially say I'm a nosy person. I don't know if I'm that nosy. No,
I like inquisitive.
I think inquisitive and curious, definitely. I'm very, very curious. I've always spent time, even when I was younger, I remember just being kind of fascinated. I'd be sitting in a cafe having an ice cream or whatever, and I was just watching the world go by, watching people interacting, watching humanity unfold in front of me, if you like. And I've always been very much an observer. I've always wanted to learn, and I've always been very, very curious about what makes us who we are, really.
Did that manifest itself into any form of art then? I mean, I remember my mother and father bought me a typewriter. I still have it. I love this typewriter. I think possibly that led me toward journalism in many respects. And did you have a similar, I almost said epiphany, but that's probably not the right word.
I mean, I was a voracious reader when I was younger, and I still read now, not as much as I would like.
Well, I can see all the books next to you.
Yes, these are mostly photography books though. And just that idea of immersing yourself in someone else's world and in someone else's imagination and in storytelling, I think that really stuck with me. So I wasn't actually particularly arty when I was a child. Like I didn't do art. I didn't even do art GCSE. I never really thought myself as creative in a kind of conventional way. Right. But I think my mind acted in a kind of creative way in some ways. And I was always forming stories in my head And for me, the best way of expressing that was through photography.
Longer tail is how you work now. Projects that take a while to shoot, but actually probably longer researching by the sound of it. Some of your projects take years to read into, don't they?
Yeah, so I actually had a bit of a moment, probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. I'd been working, relatively commercially. Well, I had been working commercially and relatively successfully as a commercial photographer. Not, ever earning huge amounts of money or being like top of my field, but, getting by. And I kind of felt that was enough in some ways. I felt lucky to be able to do that. But I also felt a real longing to work on my own personal projects because I had all these ideas swimming around in my head and I wasn't really able to give them the time or space that they needed. So I did have, I suppose, some ways you could call it a kind of epiphany, a moment where I thought either I changed my practice in some way, or I'm going to fall out of love with photography because I felt I was on a kind of treadmill to a certain extent. So yes, about 7 or 8 years ago, I made a very conscious decision, which meant it impacted me kind of financially, personally, psychologically, if you like, to step away from commercial work and to really invest on kind of many levels in my personal work and on long-term research-based projects. But that was a decision that I made very kind of firmly, because up until that point, I'd always dabbled in personal projects and I've got many still on my website, but I never really gave them the time or space that they needed. And actually what I ended up doing, I thought about studying and perhaps going back to college and doing an MA in photography, but I ended up doing an MA in anthropology at SOAS at University of London, which fed into a very long-term project, which I worked on for 5 years, called Ex Voto, about pilgrimage sites.
Yes. Yeah.
Christian pilgrimage sites, all shot on large format film in black and white. So in a very, very slow and considered way, really the opposite to things like the Time Out guides, where I was, roaming around with a digital camera, taking thousands of images a day. This was the kind of antithesis to that. This was working in a very slow and considered and meditative way that actually really reflected, the pilgrims and these sacred sites that I visited as well. So yes, I do work on long-term research-based projects, and sometimes they take many years. But as a result, I personally am much more fulfilled.
I want to come to Ex Voto in a while, actually. It's encouraging, too, that you see many of your topics, your projects, as an opportunity to learn. Surely you don't mean technically. I don't necessarily think you mean technically. I think you mean more human interaction, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always learning. Technically, I still don't consider myself particularly technical as a photographer. I work very simply. I have I only ever use one lens, for instance, because it forces me to either go closer or further away from my subjects. I'm quite kind of disciplined in that sense. But no, for me, it's about, it's a lot of my projects deal with subjects that I am not familiar with myself. So, for instance, when I decided to embark on a project about Christian pilgrimage, this was very puzzling for my friends and family who were like,
you come from an atheist family, don't you?
When have you ever shown any interest in religion or faith? And is this what's going on? They were like, they found it quite strange. But I'd seen a film called Lured, which is where I started the project, by this really fantastic female director called Jessica Hausner. And I am often influenced by film and literature. And I just had this kind of innate curiosity and this feeling that I had to go and discover for myself what this place was about, because in the film it was strange and it was mystical and it was compelling and it was otherworldly, and I felt a need to go there and see it and feel it for myself. So a lot of my work, including Ex Voto, my latest project Li Solani, which is called The Islanders, they actually deal with cultures and traditions and rituals that are not a part of my life at all, not at all, but that allow me to enter the worlds of other people, which I always try and do very sensitively and respectfully, because I'm aware that I don't necessarily share what they have. And this became an issue for me when I first started Ex Voto, because I actually felt like somewhat of a kind of imposter or an outsider entering this world of great spiritual kind of strength and really questioning my own integrity. Like what was I doing there? And I think that's partly why I did this MA actually in the anthropology of pilgrimage, because it allowed me somehow to enter this world, and it kind of, through spending time in the library, researching, writing, doing essays in seminars. It allowed me to access a world that had previously been unfamiliar to me, and it really justified me making that work there.
There's a photographer, and I'm pretty sure, I'm sorry if I've got the wrong name, but I'm pretty sure it was Chris Orwig. And I asked him to come at me with one word that he felt encapsulated or meant photography. And he said, passport. And it is, isn't it, really? It's this great unlocking mechanism, isn't it, photography?
Yes, but then it also does come, yes, it's a passport to other worlds, if you like, to other experiences. But with that, for me, comes a responsibility. And that's something that I'm very aware of as well. And that's, I think, why my projects take so long, because I don't just dive into somewhere and kind of start snapping. I often spend a year or two researching. I have some kind of formulated idea of what I want to achieve, but often that changes when I'm actually in the place. So certainly photography, yes, it gives you access in some ways, but with that access, for me, comes responsibility.
What piques your curiosity? What makes it an Alice Tomlinson project? I mean, Neil Jorgensen, actually, prior to Christmas, I spoke to, said he is as inspired by poetry as he is by photography. And I sense that's the same with you as well. Your inspirations, as you've already said, come from other sources, not necessarily photographic.
Yes, I mean, I think being kind of open to the world is very important to me as a person and also as a photographer. Yeah. And yes, of course, I'm hugely influenced by many photographers, but I am also, as I said, influenced by films and by literature and by poetry and by music even. And for me, it all kind of feeds into the same thing. Like it's something, when I'm working on a project, I'm so in that moment. I almost find, particularly working with that clunky old large format camera, it becomes quite meditative to me. Yeah. It becomes the kind of contemplative experience. And I'm really there when I'm making the work. I'm in the moment. I'm in the experience. I'm connecting with the people around me. I'm connecting with the landscape as well. But that doesn't just come from kind of, clicking the shutter or the cable release in my case. So yes, certainly I get my influences from many different kind of areas. And I feel that with photography, yes, of course, I'm looking at books all the time. I'm listening to podcasts as well. And I've been hugely inspired by photographers, but I think it's important not to have a kind of narrow experience of the creative world.
I mean, for example, Vera, the horse whispering Orthodox Belarusian nun.
Yes.
I mean, how do these people even appear on your radar?
Well, I mean, she was extraordinary. She is extraordinary. Yeah. And I'm not sure how much you know, but I've actually spent 4 years working on a documentary feature film about her life.
And this was your first feature film, wasn't it, I think?
This is the first time I've ever made a film, really. I never expected to go into filmmaking. But this woman, Vera, Mother Vera, I met her when I was working on Ex-Voto, the project about pilgrimage. Yeah. And I encountered her in the eastern part of Poland, a place called Grabarka, which is a famous place in Poland of pilgrimage. She'd actually travelled from an Orthodox monastery in Belarus, and it's very difficult to always. It's difficult to describe why I'm particularly drawn to certain people. Like, it's not always easy to put that into words. Sometimes it's the way they express themselves physically. Sometimes it's their face, the lines on their face. Sometimes it's their eyes. Sometimes it's what they're wearing. With Vera, she stood out immediately. I mean, I saw her and she had this kind of she was dressed in the Orthodox Christian kind of head to toe black robes, but she just had this absolutely kind of captivating presence. And she's the person who's really had the biggest influence on my practice, I suppose, because it's now led to, kind of in a completely unexpected move. It's led to me spending many, many months in Belarus in an Orthodox monastery and actually making a documentary feature film about her life. But she was the kind of photograph that I suppose was the most significant of the whole Ex-Voto series. It's quite an austere portrait of her, almost kind of coming out of these trees in a forest in Grabarka in Poland. And she just had this kind of luminescence in a way, but this incredibly kind of deeply spiritual presence that was very kind of hard to explain, actually, because there was a particular emotion I felt when I photographed her that I've kind of never really had with anyone else. So it was definitely felt like a kind of pivotal moment in that project, but also in terms of my career.
Was that what drove maybe the filmmaking, that you wanted to
absolutely. Yeah. So I've always obviously been interested in film, and particularly kind of Eastern European film directors and Russian directors, and the cinematography that they use I've got a Tarkovsky book here, has always been a big influence on me. And of course, there's a crossover between film and cinematography and photography, but I'd never seen myself as a filmmaker, and to a certain extent I don't now. But this kind of serendipitous meeting with Vera, it felt like it was too important to just let it go. And actually she invited me and my then assistant to stay with her in her convent in Belarus. And when we got that invite, I just thought, this is not something I can turn down. And I'd actually also got a grant from Sony because I won the Sony World Photographer of the Year award thing. And I got an extra grant to make new work. And I had to use Sony equipment for that grant, which meant
it seemed fair.
Yeah, fair enough. But I was a bit annoyed, first of all, because I was like, well, I can't use my large format plate camera.
Not really.
And I was, at that point, my still photography was all shot on a large format plate camera. So I wanted to stay consistent with that. So I thought, well, how do I kind of make the most of this opportunity? And I thought, well, I can use the Sony equipment I've been given. I can attempt to make a short film, but I can make it. I was very clear that I wanted to make it in the style of ex-photo. So the film is very, it's kind of framed in a very precise way. It's quite rigid in some ways. It's quite austere in some ways. It's all shot in black and white. So there's a visual and aesthetic, very clear crossover between the photographic series and the film.
Let's talk about the plate camera. Mentioned it a few times. I've only ever watched a very dear friend use one. I've never actually been behind one in terms of the action side of shooting. Well, if you can call it action, because it's a very slow action.
It's slow action, but it's action.
It is action. Of actually using one myself. Why did you... I think you've probably alluded to it, but why has that become the equipment of your choice, what you love using?
I think for me, it takes me to a different headspace. So, I mean, I'm not particularly caught up in what equipment people use, what camera people use. If I see images that are strong, that are powerful, that move me, I don't care if it's shot on an iPhone or a 10x8 camera. For this particular project, I think I really just wanted to slow down, and the large format camera forces you to do that. You have to be very disciplined when you work with it. So you have to use a big heavy tripod. You have to put a cloak over your head and focus on the ground glass screen with a loop. You have to use a light meter. You can only you have to preload film holders, and you can only shoot one sheet of film at a time because it's all sheets of film, single sheets of film. So for me, it just made me very, very focused on what I was doing. And as I said, it's a kind of meditative process. So you get into a particular rhythm of working with that camera that I've never really had when I've used other cameras, even, for instance, medium format cameras. And for me, it kind of reflects the subject matter. It was really perfect using that camera when I was photographing people with this deep faith and spirituality, and in these very kind of contemplative landscapes. It just fitted. So I am very tied to that way of working now. It's slow and it's thoughtful. I think that's what it is. It makes you work. You have to work in a thoughtful way. And it also changes the nature of the relationship you have with the people you're photographing, I find, with portraits. There's a different kind of exchange there. It becomes more collaborative because they have to be extremely patient, because this is not a quick snapshot. It can take half an hour to set up, can take me half an hour to take 2 shots. So they're kind of investing in it. But I think also, because of all the kind of rigmarole of it in a way, and it's quite performative in a sense, it also, I think, gives them a status in a way. And I think it's really helped me when I've had this camera, that it's kind of almost elevated the people I photograph. Like they felt, seriously important that I've kind of turned up with this huge camera. It's clearly a lot of effort. And because of that, they have a certain kind of pride in how they present themselves to me as a photographer.
Well, certainly that shows in Lost Summer, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But there is a language barrier. I mean, in Lost Summer, there wasn't, because you were working in the UK, very close to home for particular reasons, which we'll come to. But when you're using it in other places, and you talk about collaboration, it's quite interesting because it is very collaborative. And you can see in your work, there's a lot of connection, but that connection doesn't come easy easy when it comes to, I would imagine, a language barrier. And your work does take you abroad, and I wonder how you cope with that.
Well, sometimes it becomes quite farcical. Like in Poland, I ended up with a letter or a kind of note from the woman who I was going to see, who was doing some eyelash things for me at one point, who was Polish, from the local beauty salon in Finsbury Park, and like wrote me a note that I was then kind of showing to people around this pilgrimage site in Poland, attempting to explain what I was doing with this strange looking camera. So sometimes it's through kind of basic language and gestures. But for Ex-Voto, when I worked in France, in Lourdes, for instance, where many of the Christian pilgrims were from France and Spain and Italy, I actually worked with a good friend and assistant who I'm now co-directing the feature film with, because she's a filmmaker in her own right, who's fluent in many European languages, and she's half French. So she kind of accompanied me on the trips where I needed help with that. And then with my latest project, Li Solani, which is obviously shot in Italy, mostly on the islands of Sardinia and Sicily. Beautiful. I mean, I am learning Italian, but I am by no means fluent. And that was the first time I actually worked with a kind of fixer. So I found this incredible woman who actually runs a documentary film production company, who worked as my assistant translator fixer, because I was for that project, I was going to these tiny kind of communities where no one really spoke English, and it just wouldn't have been possible to have done that work without the support of an Italian speaker.
Alice Tomlinson returns for part 2 of our conversation shortly. The sun's come out, so let me make another one of my shooting into the sun pictures today. It seems to be a shooting into telegraph poles study. I don't know why, it just happens to be every time the sun comes out, right next to a telegraph pole. This is interesting. A part of the path that hasn't defrosted at all. It's just like one part that's completely white. It's like a microclimate. Right, let's put your letters down there. Slightly faster shutter speed, 250th. What am I shooting at? ISO 800. And I'm manually focusing, because you know my X Pro 1 is a manual focusing event. I'm really trying to get some beautiful flare going on here. So 250th, what am I at? F16. And here we go. Another one. That's nice. Got some great flare. Hopefully some great flare going on with that particular one. Send your pictures, your stories, where you've been, your adventures. Adventures is a word I'm using more than once or twice today, to the email address, which is stories@photowalk.show. Here we are. Here we are in that microclimate. Not that convincing, Neil. Sorry. Yes, stories@photowalk.show, or indeed you can leave a comment on the show page. There'll be plenty for you to see on the show page today. The letters about the 365s, yes. Also some films to go and watch and go and look at as well. So, thank you to my extra milers, our patrons who walk and go the extra Photo Walk mile to support this show with a modest monthly or annual donation. Your generosity, I know I say this every week, but I mean this, goes toward the cost of producing this weekly programme. But it's also kind of like a mentor support thing as well. It's like saying, Neil, I believe in this. Come on, keep going with it. And it helps keep us in the podcast sphere, as it were. So for you, every week there's another show where I go the extra mile for you. See what we did there? Extra milers. I do an extra mile because you're going an extra mile. And this extra show, within 2 weeks already, the latest one is up. It's there, ready to be listened to. I think I sort of mused the other day that it's sort of become the Wednesday Wander. Well, we have a Friday Photo Walk, alliteration, Wednesday Wander. Yes, Neil, we did get that. And this week the show is out now. I'm shooting the breeze with an extra miler called Jim Kuzman. And he has various thoughts in our conversation that we have about this thing that we love doing. Some thoughts then to whet your appetite. We talk about fear.
On this week's Extra Mile.
I think this is certainly true for me. And I think it's true for a lot of photographers. We're all afraid of something, whether it's not being good enough or not doing what's expected, not being technically savvy, not knowing the rules, whatever it is, or maybe it's just lack of confidence.
So we talk about fear, but we also talk about gear.
But I hear that gear argument, and I think at its core, what people are really trying to say when they say the gear doesn't matter is, it's sort of like putting a $200 guitar in the hands of Eric Clapton. Right? He's going to do more with a $200 guitar than a beginning musician will do with a $5,000 guitar. So it's more about the artist than the tool.
And I want to introduce, if only just for a short moment, a wonderful book about silence. Plus, there's a little more from Alice for your ears only, Extra Milers. We're going to talk about this, the magic of seeing, and one particular project, which is about swimming pools. Now, I have this thing about swimming pools when they're not being used, and I'm not talking necessarily about the Chernobyl type pictures, though I find those fascinating. It's a very famous picture, isn't it? I mean, that one that's made of the empty swimming pool in Chernobyl. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about when it goes dark, swimming pools at night coming to life photographically in a different way.
And then in the evening there wasn't really much to do, so I'd end up just kind of wandering around these neighborhoods really. And I started spotting, obviously there's a lot of posh hotels, but there's also a lot of kind of more ordinary motels.
Motel-y ones, yeah.
Yeah, and I started spotting these pools that, as you say, during the day were like chaotic and full of life and noise and energy, and then at night they became much more sinister really. They were all kind of still lit up, but there was a real stillness there.
You can become an Extra Miler by clicking the support the show icon on the front of the website, the orange button that's there. The show is out at the moment, and we can go walking another time of the week together.
For quality used and inspected photo and video kit with a 6-month guarantee upon what you buy, visit mpb.com.
All right, a sub-theme running through today's show about 365s. And at the end of the show today, I have a personal pledge to make, actually. A pledge, Neil? Are you giving us all money? That's very kind of you. No, not that kind of pledge, unless I win the lotto, which I have a very strong feeling about. Hang on, let me tell you about that in a second. The sun has come out again, and it's glorious. Where shall I? Let's shoot through the tree. Let's shoot up the path here. So shoot along the path, put your letters down there. Shoot along the path and try and catch the sun coming through the lens to the right. Here we go. Oh, so if you sort of sway, if somebody was watching me now, what is that man doing? He's swaying backwards and forwards, looking through his camera. Here we go. What are we on? I'll stay with F18, 250th. I've stuck with ISO 800. One more. Super. I quite like that. But, pledge. Unless I win the lotto, which I have a strong feeling about, that's what I was saying. Oh, Neil, don't start with your cross fingers, turn around twice on a sixpence, say hello to a single magpie, knock on wood, break a chicken, wishbone superstitions, will you? Well, hear me out on this. This is why. This is not photographic at all, I appreciate, but I know you and I, sometimes we just chunter along, don't we? Blathering, I believe it was called at the end of last year. This is why I think the numbers are going to come up. And next week, I'm going to be announcing the opening of the coffee shop, Black and White. You know that one, My Dream, that we talk about? There'll be a gallery for everybody in there, I promise. And I'll be able to do this podcast full time. And I won't have to hide the camera bags from Sam as they turn up during the day. My camera bag habit. Is that a new bag, darling? No, I've had that one for ages. Can't think why I've not seen that one before. Does look a bit new. No, I'm just dusting that one down regularly, giving it the love it deserves. See, the simple things in life. I don't need a helicopter or a very big house in the country, as the song went. No. I just need the sound of coffee machines and picture making So here's why I believe I'm going to be winning. Mrs. Sharma. Mrs. Sharma, you've mentioned her before. Yes. Mrs. Sharma. She didn't sell me my ticket this week. No, she didn't. It was Mr. Sharma. And it was only last week or the week before that I think I told you about every time I buy my ticket. It's been like this for years from Mrs. Sharma. We always joke that she sold me a faulty one. I always say, Mrs. Sharma, that one you sold me last week didn't work at all. I feel I should have my money back. There is more. I bought the ticket last week for the weekend draw, but Mr. Sharma, who has never served me, he got it wrong. Well, he didn't get it wrong. The machine got it wrong. For some reason, and he swears blind, it had been working perfectly fine all day long, but for some reason, for me, it would only serve me the following Wednesday's draw. Today I'm recording the podcast on a Wednesday. Usually it's a Thursday, but today it's a Wednesday because Car is going in for a service tomorrow, and Barney, Sir Barkalot, not with me again, I know. He was, as always, with me on the extra mile. He's going into the doctors. The vets. The animal doctors is going to the vets for his annual MOT. So I'm making the walk on a Wednesday, and the draw is tonight. But this machine last week, it would not serve me a weekend ticket, would only serve the ticket for tonight. Guess what date it is? It's the 18th as I make this walk. Guess what the first number out was? 18. See, these signs, and behind me there was a lady, I'm telling you, I don't know where she came from, who said, that looks like a winning ticket to me. And then, as I drew up and parked Car today, there was an advert on my favourite radio station, LBC. It started as I was approaching the parking space and finished as I pulled in. Tell me this is not a sign. For the winner of the double rollover tonight. See? Tell me, come on. In the words of Del Boy, who also knew...
This time next year, we'll be millionaires.
What? Where did that voice come from? It came from that tree over there. We are so winning tonight, you and I. That coffee shop and our gallery, it's getting closer. Right, enough of this nonsense. I can see you looking at me over your glasses, over your reading glasses. As I said earlier, I'll pop the full suggestions of why photographing the 365 or a 365, one picture every day for a year, from each of the letter writers is a good idea. I'll pop those on the show page today so you can read them in full. I've been pricing them down slightly for you today. Here's Stephen Sinner's letters and thoughts, and there's an honesty to this in terms of not everything going to plan. So many thoughts with lots of O's, says Stephen at the start of his letter, about my first attempt and failure at a proper 365 in 2022. So what I learned and what I hope to implement to my second attempt this year, he says, ... First up, being a stubborn literalist by nature, I started 2022 with the goal of posting a photo taken on the day it was made and posted every single day of the year. Does that make sense? I think so. Simple, he says, right? ? Simple, that is, until you realise real life is all around you. Family and weather, fatigue, 50-plus hour work weeks and so on. So it's 2023. What am I going to do differently to make it work this time around? You remember I said I'm stubborn. Well, I still believe a 365 should be as I described. But with that said, and what he meant was, a picture that you take on the day being posted on the day. I think I clumsily sort of got that right. But with that said, says Stephen, I'm now going to allow myself a 1-day grace period from when that photo was taken. Other thoughts? That's a little bit, actually, sorry, just rewinding, a bit like what Mike Miller was suggesting in the piece that you can still read, which is on the photo essays tab. He did a real, a very detailed rundown about making a 365 project. And one of his suggestions was, be kind to yourself, to perhaps give yourself a 5-day grace period a year where you don't post, where if you don't post, it's not the end of the world. The 365 continues, it's not ended. And I thought that suggestion, well, that sort of aligns with what Stephen's saying here as well. Other thoughts and goals and objectives, says Stephen. Not every photo needs to outdo the next, or I suppose the past. Quit trying so hard. Expand my subject matter. It doesn't need to be, in my case, South City architecture all the time. Photograph people. I've never really tried, but I do know it frightens me, says Stephen. As a side note, it does give me hope to hear in almost all your interviews with street photographers that even they have to overcome fears. And we've talked about fears, or you've heard Jim talk about fears, and that's mentioned within the show, the Extra Mile show. But even the street photographers, the well-known ones that I've interviewed, they have their fears, they have their issues when it comes to photographing people. Anyway, not so short and sharp, but it does check off another objective for 2023, and that is to become more involved and interactive with the Photowalk. It's a wonderful collection of folk, and there, I'm going to agree with you, Stephen. Humbly, I'm going to agree with you. We're not a bad lot, are we? I tell you what, I reckon it'd be one hell of an opening night at the Black and White coffee shop, wouldn't it? Yeah? Maybe my other listener would even show up. We could find out for once and for all who they actually are. Right, inspiration. Thank you for your letter, Stephen, and thank you for your inspiration about starting a 365. Stephen mentioned the fact that, I think I underlined this, that even the more established street photographers suffer from fear of photographing people on the streets. And Ruben Radding, from a couple of episodes back, starting the year 363, the episode that was called A New York State of Mind, he essentially said at one point when we were talking about, well, I asked him about fear, and he said, well, welcome to my world, which I thought was very telling. A nod to the fact he feels the very same way as so many people about photographing other people, even though it's a part of his life, it's a way of his life. And I want to play you a little back from episode 363, a few words, but not necessarily that bit, well, not that bit, but the bit where we talked about black and white. See, it's aligning again. Oh, Neil, about black and white and why Ruben chooses to shoot black and white, which is in wonderful contrast to next week's guest, who I'll talk about at the end of the program, who talks with much passion about making pictures in colour. But anyway, here's Ruben on shooting black and white.
Photography is all about reduction. We have this 360-degree world with, things that appeal to 5 senses and, 3D and all that. And we flatten it into 2 dimensions, make a rectangle out of it, stop time. And that reduction already is really significant. And black and white is just one more level of reduction, taking the color away. So in a sense, I feel like my love of black and white is a further love of the medium itself. And then from a practical standpoint, it solves a lot of problems because, if I were the kind of photographer who's working in a studio, who has control over, almost every aspect of what's in front of the camera as well as what I'm doing with it, I can solve a lot of color problems that come up easily. But because I'm working extemporaneously all the time, on the street or in bars or wherever I am, there are all kinds of pictures that would be really great, except that there's some sort of clash of color or color that sticks out and distracts from what you want the eye to see. And so black and white just immediately solves a lot of potential problems.
Ruben Radding talking about shooting black and white. Oh, this is spooky. Look what I've just found. I can't see out the other side, Neil. You'll have to explain. Oh, I thought you could. Don't you start with superstition. Are skulls, are they a lucky sign? No, I think you'll find, Neil, they're a sign of something else. Quick, get out of there. I've just found, what is this? Is it a sheep? Is it a lamb? What is it? I'm going to make a picture. I don't think it's going to be on the show page. It's a kind of a... Oh, blimey. Hang on, I'm going to have to set up the camera a bit better than that. F8, 1, 2, 5th. Let's see what we can get. I'll place it, the skull this is in the lower part of the, one of the lower thirds here, just so that it's a bit more interesting. That's strange. Not really very fitting with my sub theme today of making photographs into the sun. But there we go. All right, a quick mention for our Facebook group members. We have a Facebook page. We also have a Facebook group, Photowalk, and we have a fantastic community in there who are sharing pictures and stories, ideas. Very safe place to meet. And I'm going to start featuring some of the posts that are in the Facebook group, because some of the stories that I don't necessarily receive as letters, I still think you'd love to hear about. If you have a story, like Stephen suggested, if you have some pictures, don't have to be pictures, it's great to hear from you in text form alone too, but like Stephen suggested, if you want to join in, I'd love to hear from you. First-timers, very, very, very welcome, and also parts of the world that we rarely hear from, because I do see you on the download map. So if you live in Iran or Saudi Arabia, Oman, Malaysia, Tanzania, Chile or Swindon, in joke there, and 100 other places. There are some fascinating places, fabulous places that the show has listened in that I never dreamed we'd reach. Then I would love to hear from you. What does the world look like through your camera and your lens or your smartphone where you are in the world? Please let me know and write to us. We'd all love to hear from you. Now, 365. There are a few other suggestions for starting yours, which I will pop on the show page in their fuller form, as I've promised already letter-wise. But we also had suggestions from other letter writers, from our Mally. Oh yes, Mally of the Trees, that's the one, who said he's now considered starting to do one again, having heard us talk about it on the show. And it's going to be called 365 50 times around the sun. This is to coincide, he says, with my turning 50 and 5 years of the YouTube channel, and hopefully a book or two at the end of it. Well, I hope so too, Mally. I love your work. You know this. I love your work and the tree pictures that you make and the walks that you do through the landscapes, and also, of course, of late, these walks that you've been making when you went on your cruise. And then Gustav Janssen, who talked about using the glass platform. That's a platform we've mentioned of late. Now, Gustav, I will be featuring your letter in a week to come, as you said something about using sound, but I'll put your words about 365 on the show page today. And Kelly Mitchell, who started a 52 instead of a 365, 52 weeks in black and white. I think I'm a sucker for punishment, she says, but it was fun, and I did learn from it. And Ian Reid from Australia Land, whose letter pointed toward the 52 approach as well, for reasons you can read about. Ian, I'm going to save your letter as well to another week. There's some bits on there I want to talk about. So, the 365s are mentioned on the show page today. Some great advice in there, and it's been a running sub-theme of the show today, since it is episode number 365. So before we hear part 2 from my guest today, my curious guest, Alice Tomlinson, curious for the pictures she makes, I might add, not for who she is. That sounded terrifically rude then. I do apologise. It wasn't supposed to sound like that at all. Let's recap on this month's photo assignment, which was set by Alexander Wald. You have really, I suppose, by the letter of the law, just one more week to send in the pictures that you've made, which are going to appear on their own page that I've designed for this. But I'm going to let it run another couple of weeks, because we didn't really start until 1 week or so into January, did we? So let's recap with the photo assignment that we have once a month now, which is always in the first Friday episode of the month. This is Alex Ward.
Well, I think it's really important that as photographers we have projects, and they could be something that lasts a few days or something that lasts years. But I think it's important, and I think it's important we put part of ourselves into those projects as well. So what I'd really like is to set an assignment that asks everyone listening to create a mini project. So shoot afresh, so it's not an archival project, and then to curate a series of 5 images. Generally, that's the hardest part, I think, as photographers and anyone I work with, getting images down and going through the culling process to get that number down. So we'd like to end up with a series of 5 images that are sequenced. I'd like to see an opening shot or an establishing shot in there and a closing shot, which typically are wide shots, and then somewhere within that sequence a detail shot as well. The idea here is to have some narrative for a reader to have a look at these 5 images in sequence and understand a story there. So that's really the focus of this. So the flow and the sequencing is really important.
Should the narrative have text, or are you asking folk to tell a story sans text and to sell us and tell us by picture only?
Yes, I think let's do it without text. I think it makes it more challenging.
Yeah.
And even I would go a step further and say, when you're presenting the work, not to give it a title, to just call it untitled.
Yes, a challenge this month for you. It is... It's quite an involved challenge in some ways. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. And as I promised, there'll be a famous, not so famous flask at the end of the rainbow for the one that raises my eyebrows in this respect. Although I know that Alex is going to be looking at those pictures as well. And Alice Tomlinson has set an assignment to come in the next few months as well. Talking of whom, it is time for the second part of my conversation with her. Part 2. And we start this part by talking about closure on a project. When do you know it's done? It's a question I've asked before, actually. Can the story, though, ever really be done? This is Alice Tomlinson, Part 2. In terms of relationship, I mean, I suppose closure to a project is when a book is produced or an exhibition is put on. But I'm wondering whether you find closure with the project, because people like Vera, I think you suggested that you're still in touch with Vera.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, we're still in touch. I would consider her. I mean, there's a kind of messy line between protagonist and collaborator and friendship, that becomes blurred, that line at points. And I'm very fond of her, and I would consider her a close friend, but at the same time, she is a subject of a film I'm making. So, a lot of my work is collaborative in part, but there also becomes a point where you need to kind of create, not exactly a barrier, but you are in control as a photographer to an extent. And I've talked a lot about responsibility, but it's so essential to me that the people I portray, whether I share their language or share their culture, which often I don't, that I'm always treating them with the kind of highest level of respect and sensitivity. But that's why my projects take so long, because I don't just rush into things, and the subjects are very carefully considered, and my approach is very carefully considered.
Finding stories that are not necessarily mainstream is one thing. Bringing them back so they have some sort of commercial reality is another. How do you manage this part of your work? Because I noticed by your website that you do still shoot commercial. There are realities, there are mortgages, there are things like that we have to look after. But how does that work for you? A photographer who, by your own admission, is drawn more to your personal work than you ever will be to shooting commercial. I
mean, ultimately, I would love to be at the stage, or for it to happen, that I get more commissions that are related to the personal work that I make. And that happens occasionally, but it doesn't happen very often.
It happened with Lord, didn't it, I think?
Yeah, it happened with that. It happened more recently, actually. I was commissioned by the Telegraph magazine to photograph nuns, young nuns in the UK. I mean, I can photograph people other than nuns. I think I've been kind of pigeonholed a bit, that the picture editor was like, I've been waiting for years to commission you, and finally the perfect story has come along. And I was kind of thinking, well, I can photograph people who aren't nuns.
The go-to for nun photography.
Yeah, I know. I do it like that's a bit of a niche, isn't it? Surely not that much potential for that. So, I mean, realistically, I would love to be able to just focus on my personal projects and make a living from my personal projects. I mean, that isn't practical. I do have a great gallery called Hacklebury in London who are very supportive, and I, make some income through print sales. But at the moment, I mean, most photographers I know, even those who are kind of very successful, very well known, we're all having to do lots of things. We'll do bits of teaching, we'll do print sales, we'll do commercial work, we'll do our own projects. There's not one route to being a photographer now. And it's definitely got harder and more competitive. So yes, I do commission work still because, I have a mortgage to pay, I've got responsibilities, the boring stuff. But I feel my heart is with my personal work. Yeah.
Let's talk about one of those personal projects, Lost Summer, which in the end became a project rich with opportunity. I mean, it was kind of a gloomy period. I know it was for you, and it was for many photographers. We'd lost our work, we'd lost commissions, you'd lost travel opportunities, but Lost Summer, I suppose, rescued you in many respects.
Yeah. So this was obviously taken during the pandemic. So I suppose it's my kind of COVID project, if you like. And yeah, exactly like you said. I mean, I was feeling quite disheartened. I didn't really have any structure anymore. My ideas for making the Italian work, for instance, were having to be put on hold. Photographers weren't getting any commissions. So it was a very difficult time, and I felt my creative side of me kind of shrinking a bit, and I really didn't want that to happen. No. So I started thinking, well, how can I make work that is responding to what's happening around us? But I don't just want to photograph more empty streets or people with masks. And I started thinking about the different groups within our communities who were, particularly affected by COVID and what was going on. And I thought about the very elderly people, but I also thought about teenagers. And I've got a few friends who are teachers, and they were kind of telling me how the kids had just kind of disappeared. Like they'd been there one day and were told to not come back, and they'd, missed exams. There was nothing significant to mark them leaving school. So these were kids who had finished their A-levels mostly. And when I was young, we had like a leavers ball. Now everyone has proms, but all schools now, I think, as my understanding, have like end of year proms where you celebrate with your friends. You've got your exams are over. You've got the summer to look forward to. And all of these kind of rites of passage had just been taken away from them, really, these young people. So I started thinking about perhaps building a series around teenagers. Because of the pandemic and not really being able to travel, I decided to work on this project all within walking distance of where I live in North London, so within my neighbourhood. And I started off by photographing a good friend of mine who lives around the corner, her daughter's boyfriend called Jack and her daughter called Nancy in their garden. And my idea was that I wanted these young people to dress in what they would have worn for prom. So it was almost like the prom that never happened. So I wanted them to dress up in their kind of finest clothes for the prom that they were sadly never going to have. And I kind of trundled off on the first day with my large format camera in this kind of wheelie suitcase and a tripod, not really knowing what to expect. But it felt also fitting that they should be photographed outside, because we'd all been so reliant on nature and the outdoors to give us some respite during this period of the pandemic. And it felt like a very kind of democratic space. So I almost used these outdoor spaces almost as outdoor studios to kind of frame the portrait. So if the kids had gardens, we would use their garden. A lot of them didn't have gardens, so I would just make the most of what was around me. I remember one of my favourite portraits, Samuel, this kind of beautiful boy in a kind of white tuxedo.
With the superb bow tie.
Yeah, with the amazing vintage bow tie that turned out that it was his dad's Armani one from the 70s. His dad obviously had great style. And, he lives in a small block of flats in Stoke Newington. There's not really very much around there, but I just looked around and there was, a very simple wall, but with some ivy kind of framing where he stood. So I really had to be quite resourceful and creative in terms of what I could find. If they didn't have gardens, I'd just use... if they have backyards, I'd use a backyard, or we'd use local parks if they live near a park. And and I would kind of chat to them and we would talk about their experiences. And actually, they were really proud to be part of this project. And it gave them a purpose and it gave them a focus and it gave them a reason to dress up. And I think they felt quite special, even if it was only for, a couple of hours. So that was a very lovely kind of thing for me to witness, really.
Yeah, you can see how special they felt. It became, special for you as well. It became a Taylor Wessing experience, didn't it?
Yeah, well, that was quite funny because, the Taylor Wessing's always been a bit of a bugbear for me because it's the National Portrait Gallery's main photographic portrait prize. It's been going for many years now. Yeah. It was always, I remember when I was at St Martin's, I was like, my dream is to one day get into the Taylor Wessing Prize. And I'd kind of wander around the hallowed walls of the National Portrait Gallery during the prize. And I had many, many, many rejections. And it's quite funny because you used to have to just drop up. Now you have a digital submission and then you submit prints if you go to the next round. It used to be that you just submitted prints, physical prints. And the amount of times I'd done this kind of walk of shame to collect my rejected prints. But, I suppose there must be some kind of resilience or determination in me somewhere and like to keep going. And I did get into it, actually, I think it was in 2018 with a portrait of one of the pilgrims from Ex Voto. So I was lucky to have my work included in the Taylor Wessing then. But yes, it was a complete surprise that 3 portraits from Lost Summer from this series did win first prize in the Taylor Wessing Prize in 2020, which kind of felt like, validation and vindication to an extent. But it was lovely that work was recognised because it gave these young people a platform as well.
I don't know whether I hope you're not going to feel offended by this, but there are pictures that look like Taylor Wessing pictures to me. And I remember, with friends walking, around and say, there's a Taylor Wessing. There's a Taylor Wessing. There's a particular kind of picture.
Yeah,
it would seem to me. Yeah.
It became a joke at one point that you just had to photograph, a kid with a rabbit and you'd be guaranteed to get in because there were a lot of miserable looking teenagers holding animals at one point. The portraits that were selected for the first prize are in some ways quite melancholic, but I hope that they're thoughtful and they're kind of poignant. And obviously, it would be very different if they'd been taken outside of the pandemic as well. So it gives them there's a story, there's a whole story there in terms of what these teens were going through. But yes, I also find, I've been very lucky with competitions, but I'm also aware that any other, different set of judges have different opinions and it's all very subjective. So there is an element of luck involved as well. But I do actually think, having gone to the Taylor Wessing this year as well, that they are kind of expanding their idea of what a portrait is. So for me, it's become a little bit less kind of rigid in terms of the interpretation of portrait. And I think they are open to different types of styles of portraiture now in a way that perhaps they weren't once. But my work is, it's pretty traditional. Yeah. It's shot in a traditional way. It looks traditional in a sense, but I also try to achieve some element of kind of timelessness, which is perhaps overused, but otherworldliness, and particularly with Ex Voto and Lee Solani, the Islanders, the Italian project, I hope there's a sense of you entering this kind of other world in a way. So I hope there's some kind of magic there as well within the traditional style.
Ex Voto, we've mentioned EXVOTO. We've mentioned it a couple of times. Tell me about Ex Voto, because though this is a story and narrative, as we said, about religion and belief and pilgrimage, it's not necessarily your belief, as we've established. Tell me about that. In fact, probably we should start with what Ex Voto actually is, what it means.
So an Ex Voto itself is actually an object of an offering of devotion, or object of devotion that is often left at pilgrimage sites. And these take many different forms. So in some kind of pilgrimage sites in Mexico, you might have these kind of tableaus or paintings. Yeah. In Lourdes, it used to be that people would hang up their crutches. So these then became kind of ex votos. And the way I kind of came up with that name was that at this point, I'd been going to Lourdes for a couple of years, I think, and photographing what I found there, but I was still struggling with the direction of the project. And I was in a seminar as part of my MA in anthropology at SOAS, and someone mentioned ex votos. And I kind of thought, once I realized what they were, I was thinking, I've actually seen these all around Lourdes, but in kind of taking different shapes and forms. So I realized I'd seen, for instance, like crosses made out of twigs that were kind of left on rocks, or I'd seen all these notes that people had written, kind of prayer notes notes to the Virgin Mary that were kind of folded up and placed in crevices in rocks or under stones. And I realized that there were these very kind of small, yet very significant gestures that had been left by the pilgrims who'd gone to visit these sites. So that felt like a kind of fitting title. And then the project became about the ex voto. So the project is made up of 3 strands, if you like. It's the portraits of the pilgrims, it's photographs of the wider landscapes, which are often rocks and trees and stones. So these kind of natural elements that make up the pilgrimage experience. But there's also still lives of the ex votos that I found. And it was actually interesting because when I was in the seminar, I had this kind of light bulb moment, if you like, where I thought, oh, wow, I've seen those all around Lourdes and I never really knew what they were or if they had a name. And now this all starts to make sense. It's all part of the wider pilgrimage experience.
The people that you photograph, do you in some respects, with a small eye, interview them as well? Because I know you are very researched. You do a lot of research into the project before you get there. But once you're there, of course, you become quite reactionary as well. You have to be, because things change in front of your eyes.
So I take notes when I'm there. And actually, I did use interviews because I ended up writing my MA dissertation about Lourdes and actually about phenomenology, which is a rather wordy term, but it's all about kind of lived experience and bodily experience. So I did use interviews that I'd made as part of my research in my kind of academic studies as well. But in the book, everyone is quite anonymous. So there are essays in the book that frame and contextualize the work, but there aren't interviews with the individual people I photograph. So I tend to take notes rather than kind of get a dictaphone or record them on my phone. And I find, I don't know, I've got so many notebooks just bulging with notes and observations. And that's how I like to document what they're telling me.
Did you find any faith yourself? I mean, studying these people and photographing them, coming from this atheist family who, as you suggested, questioned why you would go and do such a thing. Were you drawn to faith at all?
I didn't have a big moment where I was like, wow, somehow it's now all makes sense. And I completely get why people have this faith. But I saw how it affects people. I saw the strength it gives people, particularly in very difficult times, because many people come to Lourdes who are suffering.
Yes.
You know, they're suffering physically, they're suffering emotionally. I mean, it's known for its kind of miraculous cures, if you like. So you do see a lot of people there who are physically very, very, very ill. And I don't think many of them think they're going to go there and suddenly kind of leap out of their wheelchairs and run a marathon. But I think I experienced that a lot of people who went there came away with a sense of spiritual renewal. And there's some safety in having that belief. There's some kind of comfort and some almost solace there. So in a sense, although my experience through making this work certainly hasn't kind of made me religious, if you like, I think I have more respect for it and more understanding than I ever do. And I really do see what it can bring people. Not always, but what it can bring people.
Well, your latest book is out now. I will be corrected by your pronunciation of Lisolani.
Lisolani, yes, that's perfect.
Well, when I originally said it to you, it was awful. But so, and it's got a few fans already. One of the best photography books of 22, said The Guardian and The New Statesman. Tell me about it. I know we've touched on it already. It took you to Italy, or the islands of Italy, and you photographed the rituals of the islanders. I must say, there's some fairly ominous-looking portraits in there.
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm definitely drawn to the kind of strange and surreal at times, and the mysterious as well. So there's definitely a kind of darker element in some of my work.
Yes.
And I mean, the work really kind of talks about a lot about the relationship between, well, if you like, good and evil, the sacred and the profane. There's a lot about the land. So through my research, I found these communities, mostly in Sicily and Sardinia, which actually don't really consider themselves Italian.
No, they don't.
These are communities that have separate languages, they have separate traditions, they have separate rituals, and they're very much of their own kind of identity. And I discovered through my research that many of these communities have particular costumes and masks that they wear at specific times of the year, perhaps to celebrate. Some of them are more pagan, to kind of celebrate the land and the fertility of the land. Others are more religious, so they will wear these costumes during Settimana Santa, for instance, which is Holy Week. But I just kind of felt that I just discovered this other world that kind of was mystical and mythical and odd and strange, but captivating as well.
And made friends whilst doing so, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, this was quite interesting for me because normally, so my plan was to actually go during these festivals and celebrations that take place mostly in these quite isolated, often mountainous villages throughout Sicily and Sardinia. And actually the project started in the Venetian lagoon originally, and then I kind of moved south and west. But many of them, are built around certain times of the year. Whether they are celebrations of saints or Holy Week. And my idea initially was that I would go during these carnivals, during these celebrations, to photograph the people taking part. Yeah. But these all got cancelled, of course, because of the pandemic. So I thought, well, okay, that's not going to happen. So they were kind of on hold. But actually, it really worked in my favor because what I ended up doing working with this fixer was to identify the communities that I really was interested in photographing. And she would then get in touch with the communities. And she kind of built this itinerary whereby we would go to different villages on different days and they would dress up especially for us. And actually, because they hadn't worn these costumes and masks for a couple of years because of COVID, they were so excited, and it became this kind of local village event. And a lot of these costumes, they take a long time to put on. Like some of them are like kilograms and kilograms of cowbells, for instance, or there's these kind of anthropomorphic wooden masks. So many of them are very, very special to those communities. They're almost treated like treasure amongst families and communities. Many of them are passed down through generations as well. So I was a little worried about how they would respond to them kind of putting them on for us, essentially. But actually they were really open to it, and it worked extremely well.
In terms of the book itself, I believe your notes and maps and things are in the book as well. Is that right?
They're actually in another book, so it's a little confusing. I became a nominee in a competition called the Prix Elysée, which is a Swiss competition.
Oh, okay, right.
Yes, which shows photographers' work in progress. So that was when the project really got some momentum, I suppose. And they published a book of the 8 nominees' work, which showed kind of it's really interesting because it shows what's behind the thought process. So in that book, in the Prix Elysée book, there are spreads from my sketchbooks and notebooks. And then in the actual book, which hopefully you'll see, there's a really beautiful quote at the beginning that I found when I read a book about Sicily, that is an inscription that exists on a bell in an old church in Sicily that for me kind of guided me through the project. So that became very significant. And then there's an essay at the end, but everything is also in Italian and English as well.
Can I buy the Prix Elysée one as well?
Yes, you can. I can send you a Prix Elysée one. Yeah. I've got a few, so I'm very happy to send you a Prix Elysée one.
This idea of being able to feel the work of somebody.
It's almost like you're seeing behind the scenes, and like you say, it is an impression. Because I think with photography, you often see this kind of polished, finished, final project. You see the book, and it all looks not necessarily easy, but you don't see how you reach that point. Yeah. You know, photography projects, it's about failure as well. It's about things not working out. It's like a puzzle that you have to put together. It's I mean, a journey is a kind of overused word, but I do feel that every project I do, it's like this torturous at times journey. And I think the Prix Elysée book is really good in that it takes you behind the scenes of projects.
Well, I think that's fascinating to be able to do that, and a great privilege. This year I want to try and answer the question that seems unanswerable, or at least has the last 3 years that I've been asking it. I'm still a little bit in the dark, but because you practice this genre of work, what is the definition of fine art photography? This is the Alice Tomlinson definition.
Gosh, I don't really know what to call myself, to be honest. I think on my website I say documentary and fine art photographer, but maybe that sounds a little pretentious. I don't know.
I hope it doesn't sound like that, because it is a genre, and I'm trying to understand what it means. It
is, but I don't necessarily actually find these very helpful, these genres, because I think they all cross over as well. Because in many ways I'm a documentary photographer in that I'm photographing what I come across or what I see. It was a little different with Lee Solani because I guess that was slightly more set up.
Yeah.
But I suppose, I mean, for calling myself a fine art photographer, if I do, or that term, for me it is really referencing more it's the research that goes into it. It's that you're not just kind of going out on the streets and shooting what's around you. You're actually thinking, not necessarily conceptually, but there is a idea there, and there's a theme there, and there's a particular subject that you really want to explore. Yeah, I think it's very tricky, actually. I don't really have a particularly good answer.
Maybe it's personal investment.
Well, I think it's very personal, and I think actually all my long-term projects are hugely personal, and I put so much into them, not just in terms of the ridiculous amounts of money I end up spending on film, but also kind of emotionally. Like, I'm often exhausted when I finish these projects, but I love it as well. Like, I'm kind of addicted to making the work, but absolutely, like, a part of me is always in those images.
Yeah, notwithstanding that wobble a few years back then, I'd say I think you found your peace with photography again, haven't you?
I hope so, yeah. I do think I have.
And my thanks to Alice Tomlinson for being our guest this week. I think I have one more opportunity to get, because the sun's just toward the end of this walk. It's just, whoa, it's just really, it's come through the trees here beautifully. I'm actually feeling reasonably warm. Right, what should we have? I'm staying with ISO 800 because I'm not taking my gloves off to change the ISO. Neil, that's particularly lazy, I do apologise. F16, let's see. Shooting through the branches once more. Looking for this flare that you know I love. There we go. We'll see what that looks like. My sketchbook images from today's walk will as ever be on the show page. So for links to Alice and other photographers that you've heard from or about today, the socials and the websites mentioned, go to today's show page, which is 365 on photowalk.show, or follow the link in the podcast player app that will also take you there. You know where it is. It's on your app, just there. Follow it, and magically the page will open. Hopefully. Fabulously lucky to have a guest suggested, actually, by Hegard the Dane. Though it's a name I knew, it was wonderful to have a nudge. He is next week's guest, and I will tell you who he is in a moment's time. Our play-out song today is from The Watershed. All That I Have. Fabulous song. I love it. And we'll hear that in a moment. That song that we just finish our walk together to. The music that just plays us out of our photo walk today. This week's postscript to the show, our PS, is a thought that I think is pertinent to the conversation that we've been having today about just being out there, being in your landscape to make your pictures, whatever that landscape is. A landscape with a small L, be that a studio or a street, a cliff, a mountain, a woodside path, such as I'm taking at the moment, and it comes from a name I've mentioned a few times of late, J. Mizell. It was a name that was mentioned to us, indeed, at the start of the year by our good friend Hegard the Dane. So that's this week's postscript, and which I'll read. And for those about to embark upon a 365, I did promise a pledge. Here's my pledge. I'm going to join you, I think. Yes, I'm going to. It'll be on my blog, which I'm going to link to. I thought I'd go a bit old-fashioned on you and do it on a blog. Besides, what does my mate, my reprobate buddy Mullins, who knows all about the great god of Google and so on and so forth, what does he say? The more that's going on your own website, Google and Bing and all the other flavors, they like to see things happening on your site. So I thought, well, why don't I give them something to see? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that. It's going to be like a journal, a pictorial journal. And although you know me, I like to write, I don't think I'm going to do much writing with it. It'll just be a daily diary, a daily pictorial diary of where I am. So that's my pledge to go with the 365 thing that we've been talking about today as our sub-theme. So yes, returning to J. Mizell, I think, his words are relevant to me as they may be to you if you're about to start a 365. I nearly said the J word again. And then I could almost sense Alice looking at me then. Are you going to use the J words? No, don't worry. So this is what Jay Mizell said. If you're out there shooting, things will happen for you. If you're not out there, you'll only hear about it.
You are my feel-good, my homeward bound. Even in secret, I don't look down. Till we travel into states, or taken by the time zone. Yearning with my eyes closed, I'm longing for home. I would do anything to hold you, take you in my arms. I would give everything to hold you, all that I have, love. When I'm with you, the clock ticks down. I'll never own more time with you than now. I'll miss you when you leave. I want you on my way. I'm jealous for these days. I need you to stay. I would do anything to hold you, take you in my arms. I would do everything to hold you, all that I have, love. Play out and they pass away, and my aging heart will stop someday. But if it's you who goes, I will not wait around. This time with you is all I'll ever want, so give it to me now. I would do anything to hold you and take you in my arms. I would do anything, give everything, all that I have loved. I would do anything to hold you and take you in my arms.
That's The Watershed and All That I Have. I can't believe January is almost done and signed for. February is on the way, and within Feb, there's something in many cultures, even my other listeners' one, called St. Valentine's Day. Now, don't panic. I'm not suggesting we're about to run a smooch-a-thon about our nearest and dearest, because, well, that's not everybody's story for sure. But I tell you what is. This love for our cameras and or making pictures. It's a complex relationship in itself at times, but nonetheless, you and I probably wouldn't be talking right now unless picture making brought something valuable, something special, something emotive in your life that's not always possible to explain. Just like love, huh? So a challenge for you. Not an assignment, but it's probably more a request, really. Taking a question from our roll of 12. Question number 10. currently at least, is where have you been or what have you done that you may not have had you not found photography? Where have you been? What have you done that you might not have done at all had you not found photography? You can see the question on the website if you need reminding on the Photo Features tab, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments, or better still by email to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show. If you can send any relevant photographs that might go with what you're writing, that's fantastic, though this could well be something you just want to write about. And if so, I'd love to hear from you. This, if you like, Valentine's or perhaps love story, love letter, there we go. This love letter to photography episode will be on the 11th of February. So you have 2 weeks and just a few days to get those thoughts into me. Next week, the photographer behind some of the most famous Coca-Cola adverts ever made, recognized as one of America's finest color photographers, Ernst Haas was his mentor. That can't be a bad way to start for sure. And he's the photographer behind 2012's photo bestseller, The Color of Light, one of the most extraordinary books about a photographer's personal work archive you'll ever find. Arthur Niacin is on the show, and he very much subscribes to what the show has been about today.
I'm still curious about places. I still enjoy traveling. I've been to 90 countries in all 7 continents, and there's still places I haven't been and want to go. So I would say curiosity. I'd say I'm interested in people and travel and locations and...
No more, Arthur. Save it till next Friday. The Extra Mile is out, and a reminder that this week there's more from Alice on swimming pools at the dead of night, Jim Koosman on fear and gear, and a whole host of other bits in Shooting the Breeze, and we touch on a book about silence. So go across now to our Patreon channel, which you'll find a link to on the website to hear, and of course walk with me while you listen to it at the weekend perhaps. It's an hour's extra show this week that we can spend together. Final virtual fist bumps go to Neil Ford, head of all that stuff that only seems to work when he's given it a reboot. Emily Rainier for your eyes in the Facebook group, and Andrea Gilpin, Chief of Staff on our Instagram floor. To Artlist, to Epidemic for the music, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you, and talking with you next time.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.